Hi everyone, welcome. I'm just going to pull up my screen and start sharing, and then we will go ahead and get started. Is everyone seeing my slides?
Yep, they look great, Katie. Do you want to put them into presentation? There you go. Looks great.
Wonderful. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Katie Davis. I'm responsible for social innovation within Verizon. As you hopefully know by now, this design sprint is in support of a social innovation challenge, which we're running in partnership with CGIU and VentureWell. In this session, my colleague Christina and I are going to walk you through exactly what we mean by social innovation and how we want to encourage you to think about moving from ideas to impact. We're going to try and cover all of our content in about 30 minutes at the top, and then we'll allow time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll try to come back to them all at the end. There's also an office hour session on this topic on Friday at 3 p.m. So if your questions are not addressed here, that's another great informal forum to come ask questions and get some answers from us. So with that, what is social innovation? So social innovation is really about creating opportunities to address societal challenges through market-based models. So it's about creating new products, new services, or thinking differently about how we look at business models to drive change. And so I have 3 examples on this slide here to demonstrate that social innovation can present a really big opportunity and can be a means to really significant scalable impact. So the first example on the left is Tesla, which I'm sure at least our US attendees are familiar with. It's a car company that produces hybrid and electric cars. They're centered on reducing the environmental impact of the auto industry. They're also a $25 billion company. So this idea of focusing on a social or environmental issue and really building a brand and a product around it can really represent huge opportunity. The second example is M-Pesa. This is an international example of a company that completely changed the way things were done. So in Kenya, there was, and still is, a really significant underbanked population. And so M-Pesa specifically, and the mobile money industry more generally, have revolutionized financial services there by basically turning your cell phone into a bank. And now they process more than $1 billion through that industry per year. And then on the far right, we have an example from Microsoft, who put accessibility and disability inclusion at the core of their product development. And in response, this opens up an additional 1 billion potential customers to them worldwide by creating products and services that not only can be used by people with disabilities, but really have their interests in mind in their design. One last note on this slide before I move on. I mentioned a few times already market-based approaches and sustainable business models. I want to emphasize that this mindset is important regardless of what your business structure is. So whether you're a for-profit company, a social enterprise, a nonprofit, regardless, even if you're not oriented explicitly for profit, it's still so important to understand what is the market for what you are offering, how does it meet the need, and how do you deliver that in a financially sustainable way? So continuing on that thought, I'm quickly sharing here a continuum of sort of mindsets or ways of approaching an organization from pure business through to pure philanthropy. So you can see where social innovation sits. So on the far left, we have pure business. This is focused entirely on commercial and financial objectives. And on the far right, we have pure philanthropy. So that is entirely focused on solving problems and addressing issues, but they don't always do that through a sustainable model. And this is typically donor funded. And then where we're really interested in today's session is in the middle. So on the left, we have socially minded innovation. This is really about responsible business. So this still originates out of a commercial objective, but it ensures that it's delivered in a responsible and inclusive way. So this is things like ensuring that privacy considerations are cared for, and not just doing the bare minimum to meet compliance, but really going above and beyond to think about human rights in how things are being developed and delivered. It's things like being inclusive in who you are testing products on and getting feedback from. Are you doing market research with a broad range of stakeholders who may go outside your traditional customer base, things like that. And then if we move to social innovation, this is where the mindset and the focus really starts to shift. So this is about a venture that is intentionally about centering on the societal issue and then building the right solution and the right business model around that issue. So how do we do this? These are 5 high-level principles to help you think about how you might develop a social innovation project. So the first one is really so critical. And honestly, if you don't start in the right place, the rest becomes very, very difficult. So this is about finding the right impact area or the right challenge that you are uniquely positioned to address. So this could mean leveraging a technology concept that you have that is not out in the world yet. It may mean leveraging your unique perspective based on your own lived experience. It could be a ton of different things, but it's really important to have a clear view on why you, as opposed to everybody else in the world, are well positioned to tackle this challenge and to have meaningful impact. And that doesn't mean you have to do it on your own, which we'll talk about later, but you have to have a reason that you're engaging in this issue area. The next principle is to address the needs of underserved groups. So this is really, there's kind of 2 parts to this. The first is to think of traditionally underserved groups as a market, to recognize their needs, to develop products and services that solve them. And so to think of them as a viable customer base, essentially. This also means co-creating with the populations you aim to serve. So this is about not making assumptions on what your target customers want and need, particularly if you don't come from that community, but bringing them in and asking them and getting their feedback throughout the process so that you can really co-create these solutions. So social innovation is really grounded in human-centered design. If you're familiar with design thinking or human-centered design, that's a key tenet. The last thing I want to highlight in this principle is underserved can encompass a huge range of diversity vectors. There are many underserved groups in our society based on all kinds of different things: race, gender, income, age, disability status, sexual orientation. There's a huge range of factors. And so I would just encourage you to open your minds to the whole range of spectrum of folks who may be underserved and how you can meet their needs. The third principle, build a cross-sector ecosystem. So it's really important to acknowledge that big, complex social and environmental challenges are not going to be solved by a single company, a single technology, no matter how revolutionary it is. It's not going to be one single entity. And the good news is it doesn't have to be, right? So I would encourage you to understand the ecosystems of for-profit, nonprofit, government, advocacy organizations working in your space. If you are tackling sort of a known social or environmental challenge, there are others also interested in this area, right? So it's important to understand, one, how you add to that ecosystem, right? So if we go back to the first principle, let's make sure that you are bringing something that adds to that conversation. But then also understanding how partnering with other stakeholders can help to fill the gaps in your solution and help you to advance your goals together. The next principle on innovating the business model, this is really about thinking differently about how things can be done as compared to how they've always been done. Looking at non-traditional customers, alternative routes to market, really disrupting the status quo. So the M-Pesa example from the first few slides is a good example of innovating the business model. And oftentimes when groups are underserved, it's the result of some type of market failure. So it's important to think about how you can address that. And it may be through the actual product itself, it may be the way you price it, it may be wrapping the right training and services alongside it, could be your distribution strategy, it could be a lot of things. But it's important to acknowledge that often these groups are underserved for some reason and thinking through how you are addressing that. And finally, the last is to have metrics around both social impact and business impact. So in organizations, often what you measure is what matters in the end. And so it's important to look at metrics on both sides. I think in for-profit organizations, we often run the risk of talking a lot about the social impact, but measuring the financial metrics, which are often easier and more obvious to measure. And so that's kind of where your eye ultimately goes, because that's what you're being measured against. On the flip side, I would argue that nonprofits sometimes focus on the impact metrics, but don't always think through the financial sustainability. And so by having really clear metrics in both spaces, it keeps you accountable to both sides of things. And so with that, that is my last slide. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Christina Tamer from VentureWell. And she's going to talk through how we can sort of take these pretty high level principles and actually think through the innovation process to bring ideas to life.
Great, thank you, Katie. As soon as you stop sharing, I will start sharing. And as Katie said, Verizon has put together these social innovation principles, which I highly recommend you continue to come back to as you embark on your innovation journey. And I'll be talking a little bit about what that journey looks like. You're all presumably starting at a fairly early stage, and it takes time to get to the point of scale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that. So just as a little bit of context, I am with VentureWell, and we are the accelerator partner for the Social Innovation Challenge. We're delighted to be partnering with Verizon and the Clinton Global Initiative University Program to align and work together to support innovators like you all on the call. Our vision is to enable innovators from many different backgrounds to have the tools and resources they need to be able to solve the world's biggest challenges. So climate justice, health equity, education technology are all areas that we see huge potential for bringing together different minds, different perspectives, different backgrounds to be able to identify different solutions to many problems that we see within these three areas. And as you embark on this journey, it's going to be challenging. So it's important to always remember your why. And Katie alluded to this a few minutes ago. So there's a great TED Talk by Simon Sinek. I recommend you check it out. It's called How Great Leaders Inspire Action. If you just Google that, it should come up on the TED.com website. And he reminds us that a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs are good at talking about the what we do and how we do it, the bits and bytes of how the technology works. But that might change. The market might change, the technology might change. But as an entrepreneur or as a leader, in the very simplest sense, you need to be remembering your purpose and why you're embarking on this journey. So let me share some examples. Katie shared some great examples. Elon Musk from Tesla, Nick Hughes from M-Pesa, and of course, Gates from Microsoft. But let me share some innovators that have gone through our program, the E-Team program, that we would be offering this summer to the finalists of the program, who all really did a good job remembering their why. So first is Alex. He wanted to develop a solution for his high school science teacher who had trouble providing high quality education, a high quality experience because of a lack of equipment, a lack of good and affordable equipment in the school. So he worked to develop a smartphone-based microscope to better serve this teacher and to better serve the students in their STEM studies. So the technology, took time and effort, and it changed, and he had different features and so on and so forth, but he never lost sight of the purpose to provide high quality education technology tools. The next example I'd like to highlight is Maria. So she lost her grandmother, sadly, to a chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder attack, so a COPD attack. And she wants to support other lung disease patients from having the same outcome. So wanting to prevent and predict and monitor for attacks earlier, so they don't have to go to the hospital and get sick and have an expensive hospital stay. So ideally, you can predict these attacks before they happen. So she's developed a sensor that is worn on the chest that detects what's happening with the lungs, and it can detect an attack, a respiratory attack, sooner than most other solutions on the market. So it's actually a pretty complicated technology that she's patented, but the technology will continue to develop. She'll continue to work on the business model, but she will never lose sight of her why. She wants to make sure that other people don't have to lose their grandmother the same way she did. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about Brittany. She's focused on solving the clean drinking water challenge. I'm sure we all remember what happened in Flint, Michigan, and she wants to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And similarly, that our changing climate doesn't impact the availability of clean drinking water. So she's developed a solar powered atmospheric water generator. And that's pretty complicated technology. She's working on the prototype, as you can see here. And again, that'll continue to evolve, but she won't lose sight of her why. She wants to make sure she's providing clean drinking water to communities who lack those resources. So again, 3 really brilliant, awesome, high-tech entrepreneurs, but all united in a passion for the cause. It's not a common cause necessarily, but they're commonly united in their reasons personally for wanting to pursue. So even when things get tough, even when the technology is not working or there's conflict with the team, they still are remembering their why. So that's the first point that I want to make. So your why can help you stay grounded on your path to scale. And then as you move on, continue to grow, scale looks different depending on what you'd like. So I see 3 very high level, broad opportunities for scale. You could start a new venture, you could pursue a partnership, or you could pursue a licensing agreement. And even with a new venture, there are 3 options. You could have a fast and high growing for-profit company, a slow and steady for-profit company, or you could be a nonprofit. I just would like to reiterate what Katie said, is that all these principles apply sort of no matter what business model or tax structure technically you're choosing. You still need to be able to bring more money in than you're spending. So whatever one of these paths resonate with you is totally fine. There's no right or wrong answer. Either way, you'll take a similar journey to get there. And this is what we have mapped out the journey to be. So I know this is a lot of words, and I'll walk you through it pretty slowly. So we're all at least at stage 0 right now. Verizon and the Clinton Foundation have identified 3 societal challenges broadly to give you a starting point of how to develop your projects and your proposals. As you work on exploring solutions, exploring stakeholder needs, as you prepare your application, you'll likely hone in even more specifically on which aspect of that challenge you want to solve. And this is the ideation and research phase, and you're understanding what's happening in the market. If you're accepted into the program, or as you progress either way, the next step would be to gather more data and understand how exactly your solution truly solves the problem at hand and where you belong in the ecosystem. Katie mentioned, understanding other players and how you might collaborate with them. This is exactly what you need to do as a first step on launching. Who are the other actors out there? Who's paying to solve the problem? Who is offering other solutions to solve the problem? A lot of times what might seem like a competitor or a barrier might actually be a group to collaborate or cooperate with. The next step, assuming you've defined your solution and you've defined that there is a customer for you and that customer believes that you're offering some value, is to develop the model, the business model, to actually deliver that value to the customers. So we believe in testing assumptions, testing hypotheses, using a scientific method to actually prove that your business model will work. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And this is called sort of the lean startup approach. Then you would move on to verifying that your business model works and bringing on the investors and partners that are required to scale up the technology and the solution. And you would vet that sustainability strategy in order to launch the venture with those investors and those partners. And then lastly, you would look at how you repeat that. How can you have your product being sold or brought to the users or implemented with the users who are feeling the problem on a replicable basis. And again, this is where it refers to my previous slide on a venture, a partner, or licensing. Any option is fine if you just have to choose the right one in order that makes sense for what your market is asking for. So how do you actually do this? That all sounds well and good. There's a method. It's called customer discovery and customer development. And this is a Steve Blank framework. So if you Google him, you'll come up with a lot of resources. And I have a slide at the end that links to some additional resources. But the concept of customer discovery is talking to customers, talking to users, talking to everyone who's involved in solving the problem all along the value chain to understand what they're doing, what their problem is. The recommendation is to not talk about your solution at the beginning. Do a lot of discovery to understand how they're describing the problem, what they're doing to currently solve the problem, and then you can start to understand where your solution might come into play. The best practice is to ask questions like, tell me about a time when, or what do you do when, rather than yes or no questions, so you can really get a full picture and understand what's actually happening to the people who are experiencing the problem and those who are trying to solve the problem. So you continue to do customer discovery until you get it, basically, until you get some validation of someone is saying, oh my gosh, I really want this product. How can I get it? And once you hear it in a pattern, at that point, you can kind of say, yes, I have validated, and then you can go on to actually developing those customers, selling to those customers, and then building the company around it. Finding that validation point is what we call product market fit. And that's like a golden, beautiful moment to achieve in your innovation journey, because that means there's something there and something to build around. So we want to help you find that. And this is all called the lean startup strategy. So what traditionally had happened in building ventures was to have an idea, you build the business plan and you get ready and you go and do it. You'd make the product, you'd sell the product, try to sell the product, and hopefully you would get some validation. But if you didn't, you would have to go back to square one because you had already invested all your time and money and resources into this one particular pathway. That's not very efficient. You all have, as early stage innovators, limited resources, limited time. So how can you make sure you're doing it in a way that's de-risking and having earlier validation points? And you do that through the lean approach. So you get validation from customers before you go out and start building and start selling. So you gather evidence from them. You won't know unless you talk to them. You get out of the building and talk to them if what you're doing is going to work. And once you get that validation point from the market, then you can build the business model, build in what's called an MVP. That's a minimum viable product. That's building the basics. Like, what's the very minimum product that you can put together that the customers will still want? That's what you do before you make it automatic, blue, fancy, like all of those nicer things that make it more attractive. Like, what's the really basic product that the customer will still buy? And then that's another validation point. And then you will continue to hear iterative feedback from the customers and will make improvements based on that. If you're getting a no-go, it's still okay because you can move onto a different pathway before having invested in building out the product or investing in the sales of the product. It sounds well and good. It might feel a little bit uncomfortable as you do it. So there'll be lots of ups and downs, and that's why you need mentors, a team, and as much support as you can get. That's why I hope that you all will apply for this program to try to make sense of this journey that you'll be going through. So you might have highs and lows of, maybe some interests, good technology results, but you'll also have lows as, competitors coming online, things being expensive, challenging partnerships. So it will be ups and downs. And the way you get through that is remembering your why and having a good support system to get you through. The underlying framework on all of this is you're trying to gather the evidence to feel confident to go forward before you invest too much. And everything is a hypothesis until it's actually proven. So these are a couple of closing comics from my favorite book. It's called Talking to Humans. And this is saying you're a scientist in a lab. Talk to customers. What do customers have to do with the products we eventually want them to buy? So make sure you're talking to the people who you think are going to buy your product. If you don't talk to them, you won't know. And then similarly, talk to the right customers. So this is a fella here. I've been told I need to get candid, unbiased feedback on my startup idea. And he's talking to his parents. So they really like the idea and they're very proud. So tell your parents about what you're doing if you want, but also definitely get some feedback and validation from people you don't know and who are operating in the space that you want to operate in. So those are from Talking to Humans. It's a free online book. You can download it as a PDF. I also recommend the How to Build a Startup video series. It's on Udacity. It's featuring Steve Blank, the sort of father of the lean startup movement that I mentioned in this presentation. And then I'm going in reverse order. But we also have a 3-part series that VentureWell put together with Autodesk called Thinking Like an Entrepreneur. And this can be really helpful to help you understand what pathway is right for you. I mentioned the new venture, the partnerships and the licensing, and we have some materials in there that might help you understand where you want to go. So that is all I have. I'm happy to open it up for questions at this point. And I do believe this recording will be available and the slides will be available through that.
Thank you, Christina. That was excellent. I love all those different lines that move in so many directions and the accompanying emotional roller coaster. Tyler is saying thank you. So thank you, Tyler, for joining us. Any other questions? We're right at 3:30, which is when we're scheduled to wrap. But if there are other questions, Christina and I are happy to stay on for a couple minutes to answer them. Or there are office hours, as I mentioned, on Friday afternoon. I think they're at 3 p.m. You can find that on the website. So maybe we'll just give you 1 minute to formulate any questions before we sign off. I think this is the last of the design sprint sort of plenary sessions. So there are a range of office hours coming up over the next couple of days through the end of the week. And then just a reminder that applications are due April 1st, and all of that information is available on the Social Innovation Challenge website. Oh, I see some questions popping in. Hold on. Can you please clarify what you meant by build a cross-sector ecosystem? Yes, so this will look different depending on what your project is, what issue you're working on, but the idea here is there are many stakeholders coming at all of these issues from many points of view, right? So if we take health equity as one example, right? There are nonprofits working in this space. There are government agencies working in this space. There are other companies who may not be your competitors, but could be your collaborators, right? So from a Verizon point of view, we make connectivity, right? And so there is a whole range of connected devices that could have a role to play in health equity. And so those might be for-profit companies that we could have partnerships with. They may be, like I said, nonprofits who are interested in pushing this out to vulnerable populations, often partners because they have a different point of view. They have a different way to solve the issue, right? So one example would be if we look at education. And there's been a lot of talk about the digital divide, particularly as COVID has happened and schools have gone virtual, like literally overnight. And what about the kids who don't have connectivity? And what about the kids who don't have devices at home? And so one way to reach those households is to go house to house and try and connect all those houses individually, which is really difficult for a company like Verizon. Another way is to partner with school districts who know where the vulnerable members of their populations are, who have budgets from the government as part of things like the CARES Act, and who share the incentives to help connect students. And then we can work together to efficiently connect students, but not through like a traditional company to consumer transaction. So that's sort of one of a million different examples of how that could come to be. Will we be expected to show the application of social innovation principles in our application? So I would argue that in order to fulfill the prompts, you will have to do some of this thinking, right? Like the challenge inherently is to come up with a solution, a sustainable solution to a big societal challenge. So like the application doesn't ask you how you did those 5 principles, but I would argue that to do a good job of answering the prompts, keeping those things in mind will help you to frame your response. So I see another question. It's interesting about Microsoft committing to inclusion for people with disabilities. How do you see startups including that aspect in a business model to incentivize investors? That's really interesting. There's a huge space around accessibility and disability inclusion. I'm going to punt that question a little bit and say there is an office hours session on accessibility where real experts in this space can give you a much better answer to that question than I can on the fly. What I will say is 1 in 4 households in the US has a person with disabilities. So it is a huge, huge market and a very active market that really appreciates being seen, right? So it's a huge opportunity if you can, again, not just sort of, for some industries, there are compliance requirements about accessibility, but really if you can go beyond that to think about disability inclusion, I think it can be a huge source of competitive advantage. So then there's a question, are all solutions to be tech-based? What if my model is a sustainable reorientation of things, how things have previously been done? So I would say this is a technology challenge. So technology should be at the core of your solutions. Without knowing exactly what you have in mind, it's a little hard to say. I would say what we are not looking for is purely programmatic approaches that do not have an innovative solution involved. So you can certainly be leveraging existing tech to develop an innovative application, but what we are not looking for is sort of just a programmatic approach to deploying products that already.
I would just add to that person to check out the rubric on the website. Technology is one of the areas that's on the rubric and one of the dimensions. So check that out.
So I think we have successfully cleared the Q&A.
Great, we solved it all.
Yeah, easy answers, right? Okay, so any last questions before we wrap it up?
And I'll be on the office hours for this particular topic on Friday. So looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you there.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing your submissions.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.